Awesome. Okay, well, I hope everybody had a great 4th of July. And I was off last week, had great weather, really grateful, and I'm ready to go. So, we're going to talk about change. This is going to be like a change refresher, right? We've talked about this a lot, but there's a lot of change going on, with the economy and, think about the marketplace and how, the market's changing a little bit, interest rates going up and we're actually seeing a little bit of inventory building and like what does all that mean? And we we're leaving a phase where we were judging the market by, well, did I get 10 offers or not? Now we're only getting 3 or 4, right? And so anytime that there's a change in our environment, regardless of what it is, it gets our attention. And the question is, well, what do we do about it? So I thought kind of a little bit of a refresher about why change is so hard and what to be paying attention to as we're kind of moving through a different change cycle. There's talk about recession. I'm not all that worried about it. Just in general, right? We're moving into a different period of time. So the one thing about change, okay, and it's hard to get a bad quote from Buddha, is that nothing is forever except change. That's it. Everything's always changing. And remember, we've talked about, for some of you who have been on these Mindful Mondays more frequently, we talked about the hermetic principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything vibrates, everything's moving, and changes that way. And so, basically, kind of the basics of how we're wired, okay, as a species, right? Not as a culture, right? Not as Americans, not as Chinese, not as Hispanics, but as a species, okay, is that we're simply hardwired for the status quo, because the status quo is where we believe there's safety. Okay. If nothing changes in my environment, for the time being, I'm safe. Okay. Now, that's a little bit of an illusion, okay, because there's actually really no safety in change. There's really no safety in the status quo, because if you're not changing and not evolving, you get left behind. But as a species, we're hardwired for that. And there's reasons for it. Now, we're hardwired, for fight or flight. And we have this autonomic nervous system, and autonomic meaning more like automatic, okay? And a lot of these reactions we have, like to like change, it's hardwired in our system. It just happens automatically, right? And the amygdala, which is, you can see in this diagram here, is what activates a small gland, and when it activates our fight or flight response, really without any initiative. Okay, like you don't need to say, "Hey, amygdala, fight or flight," right? It just kicks in, and then you've got to interrupt it. Okay, that's the difference, right? So the autonomic nervous system, the amygdala, is part of that, right? And when there's a change in the environment, so a long time ago, well, maybe, and actually sometimes really not that long ago, and maybe even in today in some ways, right? The environment we had around us was a lot more treacherous, and so any change in the environment, okay, could have signified danger. And then that's when the amygdala, right, your autonomic nervous system, that's when it kicks in, okay. And it's the oldest part of our brain. They call it the lizard brain, mammalian brain. It's the oldest part of our brain function, and it is simply survival. And that's really why we're really wired. We're wired for survival. So we're wired for fight or flight first. Now when you had more kind of treacherous times, okay, then our systems, like if a flock of birds took off, or all of a sudden the forest became really quiet, any of these types of things, right, that would trigger your fight or flight anytime there was a change in condition. Now, there's like a whole nother aspect to this, which we've never discussed as a group, and please feel free to chat in questions along the way here, is that we've never really talked about this, but and you can certainly look it up on your own. I'm not going to do it a whole lot of justice, but I can kind of introduce it to you, is epigenetics. And epigenetics is a study of inherited changes in our gene expressions. But they're not necessarily our DNA. So for instance, life experiences, can actually be passed on to their children. There's this whole thing about, I didn't put it in here, but this whole thing about Civil War, Civil War POWs, prisoners of war, both North and South. The conditions were so bad for these POWs that actually it took about 2 or 3 generations, for the impact to wear off, right? So it was passed along genetically. And so, studies have shown that survivors of traumatic events can pass on these effects in subsequent generations. And so if you think about, traumas, or you think about things that would influence us, in our DNA, I just picked a bunch of things here, everything from, a pack of wolves, to sweatshop laborers, right? From the industrial age. It could be anything, 9/11, right? So you have these traumatic events, and and through epigenetics, it's all part of why we're hardwired, why we're hard-coded to react to change, and we react to change pretty universally negatively, right? And really that's not what we should be doing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And so if you use like ancestry DNA or 23andMe or MyHeritage or any of these websites, if you haven't done it, it's pretty cool. And so as they're starting to sort out, all right, and starting to get more information, and the science is getting better, they know that about 6 to 8 generations, or about 150 to 200 years of DNA information, is stored in our system. And that also means that what we're, like traumas, for instance, could be, go back that far. So, for instance, I don't know, 200 years ago, what would happen? Well, 150 years ago, you'd say maybe the potato famine in Ireland or something like that, somewhere between 150 and 200 years, right? And so these different things, they're hard-coded into our system. Now, what's really, just sidebar to this, what's kind of interesting about 23andMe and Ancestry, and I've done Ancestry, is that as they're collecting data, it changes over time. So like my last name is Masiello, so that's Italian, right? And well, I'm like 3% Italian, and the rest of me is Northern European, like Norwegian and Irish and Welsh and Scotch and stuff like that. It's pretty fascinating. You got some French in there, and of course, all of Europe was Rome. All of Europe was Roman, anyways. Like thousands of years ago. So we're all kind of Roman, no matter what. But so it's changing over time, and the science is getting better and better. So if you think about like what your ancestors went through, let's just say 200 years ago, and there could be residual of that. So here's where we get to change things, is that just because we are wired, for fight or flight, it's ancient, and we don't really need it anymore. 99% of it we don't need. We don't have a pack of wolves chasing us down, or Vikings running through our streets and things like that, right? We don't have that. And so the effects of trauma can be transmitted to offspring, but reversed by a positive experience. So now we're in a different period of time. So the things that our ancestors dealt with 200 years ago or thousands of years ago, much different than today. So what are our traumas today? Okay, well, they're much different than they were even 75 years ago, right, or 80 years ago. So, like meeting up with your mother-in-law is that doesn't qualify for trauma. Okay, right? We have the ability, okay, to not only rewire our thinking but rewire our DNA, and so having that type of control means we have to have an awareness. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of go over this, introduce the epigenetics, is because it gives us a viewpoint of the fact that we don't have to react the way we react to things. Okay, it is a choice. Right? We're not worried about a saber-toothed tiger tracking us down. We don't have that. Okay, so we have a choice on how we react, how we behave. Okay, and how we deal with change in our environment. Right? And it no longer has to be this way. So we don't want to be using old tools for new problems. And it's our old programming that is kind of anachronistic into our environment today. And we look at change, and it doesn't really matter what it is if you stop and think about it for a second. Okay, you know, for most people, any type of change that's a modest or moderate consequence is like, whoa, what's that? You know, and it's like, we don't need that. You don't need that anymore. Right? It's not part of it. Again, you're using old tools for new times. So what do we do? Right? How do we develop new tools so that we can navigate change on a more positive basis? And so I've got 5 points here for you. So when change occurs, you look for the upside, not the downside. Forget the downside. Okay, go to the upside. Don't even think about the downside. Right. Number 2 is be curious. Curiosity, okay, is the key to success and happiness. You've got to take a look at be aware of what the short-term and long-term opportunities might be when change occurs. Okay. Third is hold space for events to develop. Don't rush to judgment. You know, once we start judging things, and you know, we all do it, all right, so nobody gets a pass on it. But once we start judging things, judgment, okay, narrows the field of opportunity. Once we start judging things, we've already defined a certain outcome. Now, if we're more expansive in our thinking and we're holding space for things to develop, now all of a sudden the aperture of opportunity is much greater. Okay, but you know, once something happens and it's like, you know, oh, holy crap, that's a real PIA, or I can't believe this is happening to me, right? You know, once all those things happen, and it's really hard to get out of it. You know, it's like a death spiral, and so you know, you don't want to judge too quickly. Hold space, and hold space means you kind of create kind of an invisible container of time, and you just let things sit there for a while. Right now it could be for an hour, it could be for a month, could be for a year, right? It depends on what the circumstances are. So, and by the way, if you don't know where the term death spiral came from, it came from World War One, when fighter pilots, right? Aviation was pretty young then, and biplane fighter pilots, and they called it the death spiral because they didn't have parachutes. So if you got shot down, you just spun out of control, and that was it. It's called the death spiral. The fourth item is start to vision what positive outcomes will come of change. Okay. If you could hold the vision, I've got a great quote for you at the end here from Bob Proctor, but if you could start to hold the vision of what things are going to look like, what the possibilities are, then again, your opportunities become more expansive. Now you're out of judgment. Okay, if you've already labeled something as bad, that's it. It's over. Okay, but if you start to hold a vision or visions that evolve over time, okay, then you're more likely to have a very positive outcome. And I think the fifth one is, remember that nothing is random. You're supposed to have whatever experience you're having, you're supposed to be having it. Otherwise, now, I always tell people this, is that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Wherever you are, whatever circumstance there are, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Because otherwise, if not, you'd be someplace else, right? So here's my Bob Proctor quote, and you know, I don't know how much work he does nowadays, but he's worth looking at. You can YouTube some of his things, and he was in what was he? Oh, The Secret, and every now and then I'll watch like bits and pieces of that, you know, and the movie The Secret. He was in that. He was really good. He was very prolific motivational speaker, and he's worth listening to. I don't know how much work he's doing now. But thoughts become things. If you see it in your mind, you will hold it in your hand. Great quote, right? And that's really what change is all about, right? Change is the opportunity for us to advance. It's the opportunity for us to move forward, okay? Change is not designed to be painful, all right? Painful is stagnation, and painful is lingering in the status quo, okay? Because you're not moving forward. So the epigenetics is really cool, and there's been a lot of studies on that, and it's really just recently that epigenetics has really become, and I mean recently, like in 10 years, where it's really become more mainstream. And as Ali points out here, Joe Dispenza, which is one of my favorite authors, is really good, very prolific. He was a chiropractor that got into neuroscience, and his work is excellent. And so thank you, Ali, for bringing that up. You know, he's really good, and he gets into epigenetics a little bit. There's another one. There's another. He's a biologist. Bruce Lipton is another one, and he's very deep into epigenetics, and he's been in you know, chemistry and biology for years, and he was a college professor, and that's what he taught. And all of a sudden one day he realized everything I'm teaching these kids in college isn't right, because they were looking at, you know, things like you know, petri dishes of cells and things like that, and they're looking at, you know, brain scans, right? You know, if you take two people and they meditate in the room, and if you have a brain scan going on both people, after a while, 10, 15, 20 minutes, their brain waves will sync up. And if you bring in a third person, okay, then that third person, his or her brain waves will sync up with the other two. And so they kind of realize that there's not, you know, that there's a lot going on in the DNA and in how we how connected we are, right? And so if you think about like some of the habits that you have, and I think this is kind of fascinating, if you think about some of the habits that you have today, right? They could be 150-year-old habits in your gene pool. You know, that's kind of cool. You know, maybe some of them you want to keep, and then some of them you don't, right? But that's your choice. So yeah, thank you for finding Bruce Lipton. He's great, by the way. And you can YouTube these guys. You know, the one thing that we haven't really talked about here is one of the more prolific sources for this type of information is a streaming service called Gaia, Gaia. And last time I looked, it's like $99 a year or something like that. But it's got thousands of videos and all that. So it's a good source. Well, this was fun. Thank you for the chat in, Ali, and for putting Bruce Lipton's website on there. And doesn't look like we have any other chats. I've got one more, I got two more. Bernie, see, how do you stop yourself from having such a deep rooted instinctive reaction? Well, Bernie, that's the question, right? And it's a great question, right? And the thing about it is that it's about learning how to um, how to interrupt or disrupt your reaction cycles, okay? And 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 just pause for a minute. And it takes practice, like anything else, right? I mean, habits and muscles, um, right? It's all about muscle memory. Yeah, Kara, right? Reprogramming, and yeah, Lucian, perfect. Pause, take a breath, right? And it's a little bit. You know what? It's a little so start here, right? Every now and then how you get like an urge for something, right? Like a sweet or chips. Like for me, it's chips because I like salt, right? And if you can wait that urge out like 10 seconds, like it doesn't like you don't have to wait an hour or 30 seconds. If you can wait out that urge, it'll go away. And I think and how we react to things is the same way, right? It's metacognition, right, is the process of thinking about what you're thinking about. And maybe that's when we haven't done one specifically on metacognition, and maybe we can do that next week. But it's the process of thinking about what you're thinking about. So instead of reacting, we're going to have evolution. So we're going to pause. We're going to take a breath. Okay, we're going to think about what we're going to do. We're not just going to do. See, fight or flight. Okay, is I got a pack of wolves chasing me. I'm taking off. All right. And if you think about watching a gazelle get chased by the lion, right? Before the gazelle takes off, it doesn't look around. It doesn't chart its path. It just takes off, right? And we're kind of wired the same way. Don't forget, the mammalian part of our brain, the amygdala, right? It's ancient. It's millions of years old. That's what it does. Okay. It's built strictly for survival. And so, but we don't have to operate that way, okay? Because now we have our frontal lobe, our cortex, right? We've got layers now in our brain that allow us to disrupt and interrupt that thought process, right? So, and I think that again, hard coded wiring, when there was a change in our environment, it was universally bad. See, it's not that way anymore. When there's a change in our environment, most of the time it's really opportunity. Now, if I had a pack of wolves chasing me, I wouldn't see much opportunity in that. All right, but we don't have that. So, if that helps at all. Yeah, Melissa, that's funny, right? That's great. Yeah, yeah. That's a perfect comment. Just stop and think, right? Because a lot of times what our actions are is, see, it's not the unknown future, okay? It's the known past. Almost all of our, I'm gonna say 100%. It's hard to find 100% of anything, but I'm gonna say for discussion purposes, 100%. 100% of how we react is based on our known past experiences, not the unknown. And so if we can stop long enough to understand, like before we talk or speak or act, whatever the case may be, that this is based on our past experiences. That's what we're reacting to. So really great comments. But yeah, you're right, Melissa. It's hard to train your brain, but once you train your brain, that's it. Like, once you learn how to do it with one thing, you can do it with anything. So, all right. Well, this was fun. So maybe we'll do metacognition next week. That's a pretty fun topic. And you get a chance to look up epigenetics and Bruce Lipton. So, All right, guys, have a great week. Take care.